They thought humanity would break. They were wrong. We were just getting started. Silence had a weight to it. Elias Rowan felt it pressing down on his chest as he stood inside the shattered observation dome of Astavale. The artificial sun was still active, flooding the ruined colony with perfect daylight, as if nothing had happened. Bright light reflected off cracked glass, scorched metal, and drifting fragments of insulation that floated lazily in the low gravity. The contrast was cruel. Everything looked alive, yet nothing was. He rested his palm against the transparent alloy window. Beyond it, a vast nebula stretched across space, painted in brilliant blues, soft purples, and streaks of gold, glowing under the system star. It was breathtaking in the way only the universe could be, beautiful and completely indifferent. Elias swallowed, his throat tight, as the image burned into his memory. He wondered how many times Mara had stood here with her son, pointing at the stars and pretending to name them. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was a systems engineer, not a commander, not someone meant to stand in the aftermath of genocide and decide what came next. Before the Velthari arrived, his biggest worries had been energy fluctuations and maintenance schedules. He fixed things. He optimized systems. He believed, foolishly, that logic could solve most problems. War had proven him wrong. Behind him, boots echoed softly as survivors moved through the corridor. No one spoke above a whisper. People avoided looking at one another, as if eye contact might unleash something they couldn't afford to feel. Elias caught glimpses of bandaged arms, vacant stares, clenched jaws. Every face carried the same question: why were we spared? His hands trembled, and he curled his fingers into a fist, forcing them still. He had replayed the attack 1,000 times in his mind. The sudden emergence of Velthari warships under full daylight, their crystalline hulls refracting sunlight into blinding spears. The first bombardment tearing through civilian sectors. The panic. The screams that cut off too quickly. Children were never supposed to be targets. Every galactic accord said so. Every civilized species agreed, at least in words. The central holo-display flickered to life, pulling Elias from his thoughts. Symbols resolved into translated text, as the image of a Velthari envoy formed in midi. The alien was tall and angular, its semi-translucent body glowing faintly as if lit from within. Multiple facete eyes regarded the chamber with cold curiosity, as though surveying damaged equipment rather than the remains of a human home. Human representatives, the envoy said, its voice layered and precise, echoing unnaturally through the dome. Your resistance has resulted in unnecessary losses. Continued defiance will only compound inefficiency. Elias felt something twist in his chest. Inefficiency. That was the word they used. You initiated an unapproved expansion, the envoy continued. Containment measures were enacted. Collateral loss among non-combatants was within acceptable parameters. A sharp breath escaped Elias before he could stop himself. He stepped forward, not fully aware he was moving until he stood directly beneath the hologram. The light from the display washed his face in pale blue, highlighting the dark circles beneath his eyes. Acceptable, he repeated quietly. The envoy's head tilted slightly, an approximation of curiosity. Emotional distress detected. This response does not alter the outcome. Elias looked past the hologram, past the ruined chamber, to the bright nebula beyond. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, older than he remembered, shoulders slumped under weight he had never trained to carry. For a moment, fear surged up, raw and suffocating. Fear of saying the wrong thing. Fear of provoking annihilation. Fear that humanity truly was outmatched. Then he thought of the hydroponic gardens, of laughter echoing under artificial skies, of a small hand slipping from his grasp as alarms bled. You killed our children, Elias said. The words didn't come out as a shout. They were steady, almost calm, and that frightened him more than rage ever could. Around him, the survivors froze. Even the background hum of machinery seemed to fade. The envoy did not respond immediately. When it did, its tone was unchanged. Emotional fixation on juvenile units is statistically common among your species. However, it is strategically irrelevant. Something inside Elias hardened. Not into hatred, but into resolve. He realized, with a strange clarity, that fear had been ruling him since the attack. Fear of loss, fear of extinction, fear of becoming something monstrous in response. The Velthari saw that fear and mistook it for weakness. They had miscalculated. "You want our surrender," Elias said, lifting his gaze back to the alien. "You want us quiet, compliant." "Correct," the envoy replied. "Such an outcome would preserve a functional remnant of your species." Elias let his hand drop from the glass. The trembling had stopped. "Then you don't understand us at all." The hologram flickered, processing. Elias turned away without waiting for permission, his eyes returning to the radiant stars outside. Humanity had always lived under brighter suns than most species. They had evolved under constant pressure, constant uncertainty. They bent. They adapted. And when pushed far enough, they changed. The Velthari believed the story ended here, with submission. Elias knew it was only beginning. The fleet gathered beneath an unforgiving sun. From a forward observation gallery of the Aurora's resolve, Elias watched human ships assemble in disciplined arcs, their hulls gleaming white and steel blue as daylight washed across them. Civilian freighters retrofitted with armor plates floated beside sleek defense frigates. Nothing about the formation looked elegant, but it was purposeful. Every vessel represented people who had refused to disappear quietly. The bridge hummed with controlled urgency. Consoles glowed, holographic displays painting the air with orbital paths and energy readings. Elias stood at the center, hands clasped behind his back, listening to reports flow around him. He nodded when required, answered when addressed, but his thoughts were elsewhere, spiraling between fear and determination. He still didn't feel like he belonged here. Sleep had become a memory rather than a routine. When he closed his eyes, he saw flashes of the attack on Astavale, heard echoes of alarms and panicked voices. Doubt crept in during the quiet moments, whispering that he was an engineer playing at command, that sooner or later his lack of experience would cost lives. A soft chime pulled him back. Velthari fleet confirmed, an officer announced. Multiple capital ships emerging from stellar shadow. The main display shifted, revealing angular silhouettes sliding into view, their crystalline hulls refracting sunlight into sharp, blinding flares. They moved with unnerving precision, confident and unhurried, as if the outcome had already been calculated. Elias felt his pulse quicken. This was no raid. This was judgment. "Hold formation," he said, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "Do not engage unless fired upon." A pause followed. He could feel eyes on him, officers weighing his words, measuring whether this was restraint or hesitation. Elias held his ground. Every instinct screamed to strike first, to lash out before fear took root again, but he forced himself to breathe. Humanity had rushed before. It had never ended well. The first exchange came not as an attack, but as a message. The Velthari envoy appeared again, its towering form projected into the center of the bridge, luminous under the ship's artificial daylight. "You persist in inefficiency," it said. "Your fleet configuration suggests desperation rather than strategy." Elias stepped forward. "You're still talking," he replied. "That means you're not done with us." A ripple of discomfort passed through the bridge crew. The envoy's eyes shifted, light patterns along its body fluctuating. "Your psychological resistance exceeds projections," it admitted. "However, your material capacity does not." Before Elias could respond, another signal cut through the bridge, an unexpected one. Unidentified vessels entered the system at the outer edge of the display. Sleek, crescent-shaped ships marked with the insignia of the Sorrent Collective. Neutral traders. Observers. Or so they claimed. Elias frowned. "Why are they here?" No one answered immediately. Data streams poured in as sensors recalibrated. The Sorrent ships drifted closer, their hulls reflecting the same bright starlight as the rest of the fleet. The Velthari envoy turned slightly, acknowledging the newcomers. "The Sorrent Collective has elected to assist in conflict resolution." A chill ran through Elias. That wasn't part of any agreement. The envoy's tone was almost indulgent. Agreements evolve. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the Sorrent ships opened fire. Brilliant arcs of energy launched across space, striking the human flank. Shields flared and failed. One frigate erupted into a silent bloom of light, its debris scattering under the relentless sun. The bridge exploded into motion. Casualties reported. Shields collapsing on Deck 7. Enemy fire from multiple vectors. Elias froze for a fraction of a second, the betrayal hitting harder than the attack itself. His mind screamed that he had been wrong, that his restraint had invited disaster. Guilt surged, hot and suffocating. Then training, improvised and incomplete as it was, kicked in. "Return fire," he ordered. "Protect the civilian ships. Do not pursue." Human vessels responded instantly, maneuvering with desperate agility. The sky filled with streaks of light, radiant against the blue-gold glow of the nearby star. Explosions blossomed, harsh and bright, sending shockwaves through space that rattled even the Aurora's resolve. Elias gripped the railing as the ship shuddered. His breath came fast, shallow. Every loss report felt personal. Every flashing red indicator was another life balanced on his decision. Why him? The question clawed at him. Why had this fallen on someone who still woke up shaking? Between commands, his gaze drifted to the viewport. Even now, the universe looked calm. The star burned steadily. Distant planets traced their orbits in perfect indifference. The contrast was maddening. "We're holding," an officer called out, disbelief edging her voice. "But barely." Elias nodded, forcing himself to focus. "Then we hold," he said. "That's what we do." Inside, something shifted again, not into confidence, but into acceptance. He understood now that leadership wasn't the absence of fear. It was carrying it without letting it decide the outcome. The Velthari envoy flickered, its image distorted by interference. "Your resistance remains anomalous." Elias met its gaze, sweat cooling on his skin. "Get used to it." As the battle raged under blazing daylight, Elias felt the weight of humanity pressing through him, fragile, furious, and unbroken. The threat was rising. The galaxy was closing in. And for the first time since Astavale fell, he realized that retreat was no longer an option. Whatever came next, humanity would face it standing. The battle did not end when the firing stopped. It lingered in the air, in the static humming through the Aurora's resolve, in the faces of the crew as damage reports scrolled past faster than anyone could fully absorb. Bright daylight still flooded the bridge, pouring in through the wide forward viewport, but now it felt harsh, exposing every flaw, every crack in their fragile control. Elias stood unmoving as casualty numbers climbed. He forced himself to read each line. Names. Deck assignments. Life signs lost. He refused to look away, even as his stomach twisted and his chest felt too tight to draw a full breath. Command meant ownership. If he turned from this, he had no right to stand where he did. "We've stabilized the line," a tactical officer said quietly. "Velthari and Soren forces are pulling back to regroup." Pulling back. Not defeated. Elias nodded, though the word regroup echoed ominously in his mind. He knew what it meant. They were being studied, recalculated, prepared for something worse. Humanity had survived the opening strike, but survival alone did not win wars. He turned and walked from the bridge without ceremony, the doors sliding shut behind him. The corridor beyond was brightly lit, pristine white panels reflecting the artificial daylight, but the illusion of calm shattered as soon as he passed the medbay. Inside, stretchers lined the walls. Doctors moved with practiced urgency, their faces set in expressions that balanced exhaustion and grim focus. A young pilot sat on the edge of a medical bed, hands shaking as a medic wrapped his arm. His eyes were unfocused, staring at nothing. Elias slowed, then stopped altogether. "You did good out there," Elias said, his voice softer than he felt. The pilot looked up, recognition dawning. "We lost my wingmate," he said flatly. "He was right there. Then he wasn't." Elias had no answer that would fix that. He placed a hand on the pilot's shoulder instead, feeling the tension beneath his fingers. "I know," he said. It wasn't enough, but it was honest. He continued on, each step heavier than the last, until he reached his quarters. The door sealed behind him, shutting out the noise, the light, the weight of watching eyes. For a moment, he stood there, breathing shallowly, trying to hold himself together through sheer will. It failed. His knees gave out, and he sank onto the edge of the bed, head in his hands. The control he had built so carefully cracked wide open. Images flooded in, Aster veil burning under a bright sky, the betrayal flare of Sorinth weapons, the quiet disbelief in the pilot's voice. "I'm not enough," Elias whispered. The words felt true in a way that terrified him. He was reacting, not leading. Every step forward was paid for in lives, and the cost was rising faster than he could justify. For the first time since he had spoken to the Velthari envoy, surrender crept back into his thoughts, not as a strategy, but as a temptation to make the killing stop. A sharp tone broke the silence. An incoming transmission request pulsed on the wall display. Elias hesitated, then accepted it. The image that appeared was not Velthari. The Sorinth emissary filled the screen, its sleek, silver-toned form standing beneath bright ambient light. Its elongated eyes gleamed with calculated calm. "Human commander," it said smoothly. "I regret the misunderstanding earlier." Misunderstanding. Elias felt anger spark, but it was quickly smothered by exhaustion. "You attack civilian ships," he said. "There's no misunderstanding." "The Velthari presented us with compelling data," the emissary replied. "They predicted your collapse within acceptable parameters. Supporting the winning outcome seemed logical." "And now?" Elias asked. "Now," the Sorin said, inclining its head slightly, "the projections have shifted. You exceeded expectations. Continued conflict would be inefficient." Elias straightened slowly. "So you want back out?" "We are prepared to withdraw support from the Velthari," the emissary continued, unperturbed, "in exchange for limited access to your solar energy research." The words landed like a physical blow. "You were watching us," Elias said, "measuring us, while our people were dying." "Yes," the emissary replied. "Observation is prudent." Elias rose to his feet. His hands shook again, but this time not from fear. "Get off my channel." The Sorintha's eyes narrowed. "Consider carefully. Refusal will leave you isolated." The transmission cut. Elias stood there long after the display went dark. Isolation. Betrayal. The galaxy revealing itself not as a place of wonder, but of cold calculation. Humanity was not hated. It was simply expendable. Something inside him finally broke, not into despair, but into clarity. He returned to the bridge with renewed urgency, calling for senior staff. The room filled quickly, officers gathering under the bright lights, tension etched into every face. "They are all watching us," Elias said without preamble. "Not just the Velthari. Every major power. They want to see how far we bend before we snap." Silence followed. "We can't outgun them," someone said. "And we can't trust them." Elias nodded. "No. But we can change the rules." He pulled up a schematic, an incomplete, controversial project buried deep in humanity's scientific archives. A system never meant for war, dismissed as too ambitious, too dangerous. The Sol Array. Murmurs rippled through the room. "It was designed to reshape worlds," Elias continued, his voice steady now. "To harness stellar output on a scale no one's attempted. If we activate it here, under full daylight, we don't just fight back. We show them something they didn't account for." Admiral Keen studied him closely. "It could fail." "Yes," Elias said. "And if it does, we'll lose anyway." He met their gazes one by one. Fear was still there, coiled in his chest, but it no longer paralyzed him. It sharpened him. "They killed our children," he said quietly. "They betrayed us, and they expect us to accept it." He shook his head once. "I won't." Outside the viewport, the star burned on, brilliant and uncaring. Elias looked at it and felt, for the first time, that humanity might be ready to meet the galaxy on its own terms, even if it meant stepping into the fire. The star filled the viewport like a living god, vast and radiant, its surface rolling with golden flares beneath flawless daylight. Elias stood at the center of the bridge as the Aurora's resolve slid into final position, surrounded by the skeletal lattice of the Sol Array. Gigantic metallic petals unfolded in silence, each segment catching the sunlight and reflecting it in blinding brilliance. What had once been a theoretical construct now loomed as a reality that made even seasoned officers uneasy. All array segments aligned, an engineer reported, her voice tight. Energy intake climbing beyond simulation thresholds. Elias closed his eyes for a brief moment. Doubt surged again, sharp and insistent. If this failed, there would be no second chance. Humanity's last stand would become a cautionary tale whispered across the galaxy. He inhaled slowly, grounding himself in the present, the hum of the deck, the warmth of artificial light, the quiet trust in the eyes around him. "Proceed," he said. The Sol array awakened. Light surged along its framework, not as an explosion, but as a controlled awakening, like dawn accelerating into noon. Energy streams flowed inward, bending space around them in shimmering waves. Readings spiked, alarms fled, then stabilized as systems compensated faster than anyone had dared hope. Across open channels, the Velthari fleet reacted instantly. Their formations faltered as sensors screamed warnings they did not understand. Crystalline hulls glowed erratically under the intense stellar resonance, their calculated precision unraveling in real time. "What is this?" the Velthari envoy demanded as its image forced its way onto the bridge, its once composed form flickering wildly. Elias stepped forward, bathed in golden light. "This," he said evenly, "is what happens when you push us past the point of fear." He raised his hand, and the command was executed. The Sol array released its charge, not as a weapon of annihilation, but as a wave of harmonized stellar energy. It rippled outward under the blazing daylight, invisible at first, then visible only in how it bent the light itself. One by one, Velthari ships went dark. Weapons systems shut down. Drives stalled. Entire armadas drifted helplessly, intact but powerless. The galaxy watched. Signals flooded in from distant observers, Sorinth, neutral coalitions, powers that had never bothered to answer humanity's calls before. Panic, disbelief, recalculation. The narrative was collapsing faster than the Velthari fleet. The envoy's voice fractured. "You were expected to fracture, to retaliate with chaos." Elias felt the weight of every loss press against his chest, but it no longer crushed him. "We didn't come to erase you," he said. "We came to make you stop." Silence followed, heavy and absolute. Under the unbroken shine of the star, the Velthari surrendered. The aftermath unfolded slowly, deliberately. Treaties were drafted in chambers flooded with natural light, watched over by representatives who no longer mocked. Humanity's demands were simple and unwavering: recognition, accountability, and protection for the innocent. War crimes were named. Lines were drawn that would not be crossed again. Elias signed the final accord with a steady hand, feeling neither triumph nor relief, only a quiet resolve. The cost had been too high for celebration. Weeks later, he returned to Astavale. The colony was still scarred, but life had returned. New structures rose beneath the restored dome, gardens blooming in vibrant greens under artificial suns tuned slightly warmer than before. Children's voices echoed once more, cautious at first, then growing bolder with each passing day. Elias walked through the familiar corridors, sunlight reflecting off polished floors, until he reached the memorial garden. Simple stones stood beneath an open skylight, each etched with names. He knelt, placing his palm against the cool surface. "I was afraid," he whispered, "every step of the way." The light above him shifted as the station adjusted its orbit, casting warm brilliance across the stones. Elias looked up, eyes stinging, and let himself breathe. Humanity had shown the galaxy its other side, not blind rage, not endless mercy, but something far rarer. Restraint forged from pain, strength guided by memory, a willingness to stand in the light and say no more. As he rose, laughter rang out behind him. Children ran past, chasing one another beneath the glowing dome, their shadows stretching long and alive across the ground. Elias watched them go, a small, fragile smile breaking through at last. They had been tested. They had been wounded. But humanity was still standing. And the galaxy would never forget what that truly meant. The galaxy did not change all at once. It shifted slowly, like a massive tide pulled by unseen gravity, and humanity stood at the center of that pull whether it wanted to or not. Elias Rowan learned that truth in the weeks after peace was declared. Every day brought new transmissions, delegations requesting dialogue, coalitions proposing alliances, observers asking careful questions framed as compliments. They spoke under bright conference lights, their faces projected in perfect clarity, their tones measured and respectful. None of them mentioned children. None of them mentioned Astavail unless Elias did first. He noticed who avoided his eyes when he spoke those names. The Aurora's resolve remained in high orbit above Earth, its hull gleaming under open sunlight as repairs continued. Elias often stood alone at the forward viewport, watching the planet turn slowly below. Blues and whites dominated the view, clouds curling like living brushstrokes across the surface. This was what had almost been lost. Not territory, not power, home. He was supposed to feel victorious. Instead, he felt older. Admiral Keen joined him one morning, hands clasped behind her back. "They are calling it a turning point," she said. "The historians, the analysts. Humanity's arrival on the real stage." Elias exhaled quietly. "We were always on the stage. They just weren't looking." She studied him for a moment. "You did what no one expected." "I did what I had to," he replied. "That's not the same thing." Keen nodded once, accepting that. "The Council wants you planetside. They are forming a new interstellar charter. They want you involved." Elias looked down at Earth again. For the first time, the thought didn't feel like a burden. It felt like responsibility, heavy, yes, but chosen. "I'll come," he said. "On one condition." She raised an eyebrow. "We don't let this become mythology," Elias continued. "No heroic versions. No sanitized history. We tell the truth. What it cost. What happens when lines are crossed." Keen's expression softened. "I think they are finally ready to hear it." Before departing, Elias returned once more to Astavail. Reconstruction was nearly complete now. The dome no longer felt like a memorial frozen in time, but like a place learning how to breathe again. Bright daylight poured through clean glass, illuminating markets, walkways, and living spaces filled with movement. A child nearly collided with him as she ran past, laughing, her footsteps echoing sharply. She glanced back only long enough to shout an apology before vanishing into the crowd. Elias smiled despite himself. He made his way to the edge of the colony where the original breach had occurred. The damage had been sealed, reinforced with stronger alloys and redesigned energy shields. Engineers had left a small section visible by choice, a reminder, they said. Elias approved that decision. A quiet wind hummed through the structure's ventilation, carrying with it the distant sounds of life continuing. Elias stood there for a long time, hands folded, mind drifting. He thought of the Velthari envoy's final expression, not anger, not hatred, but confusion. Humanity had not responded as expected. They had not shattered into chaos, nor lashed out blindly. They had adapted, focused, endured. That was the truth others were struggling to understand. On the day Elias addressed the Interstellar Assembly, the chamber was flooded with natural starlight redirected through massive crystalline lenses. Representatives from dozens of species filled the space, their forms varied and alien, yet all bound by the same unspoken tension. Elias stood alone at the center. "We are not here to dominate," he began, his voice steady. "And we are not here to be victims." The chamber stilled. "We learned something in this war. Not about our enemies, but about ourselves. That fear does not make us weak. That grief does not erase our judgment. And that when you force humanity to choose between submission and survival, you may not like the answer." He paused, letting the words settle. "You saw one side of us," Elias continued. "The side shaped by loss. Do not mistake that for all we are. Test us again, and you may meet it once more." No one interrupted. No one mocked. When the address ended, the applause was subdued but sincere, a sound Elias would never forget. Later, as he returned to his ship under a sky ablaze with daylight, Elias felt something unfamiliar settle over him. Not peace, not closure, but certainty. Humanity had crossed a threshold. They were no longer asking for a place among the stars. They were claiming responsibility within them. And somewhere, beyond the reach of fear and expectation, the galaxy was finally beginning to understand that the other side of humanity was not something to provoke, but something to remember.